Hello, dear listeners. Today we have Miss Carol Gates, also going by the moniker of Marla Darling. She is a producer of live performances with new works in the, well, works. So let's get started. Good afternoon, Carol. It's so good to see you.
Hi.
In the interest of full disclosure, Carol and I go back at least decades.
Yes.
We we're both transplants from Arizona, wound up in Oregon. Although your Oregon is quite a bit more cosmopolitan than my Oregon. So
Because you're in Roseburg,
I
right?
know, yeah, yes,
Okay, yeah.
little Roseburg,
Yeah,
yeah.
so I've only been to I remember I've been to Roseburg one other time in my life, which was incidentally 1997.
Oh, okay.
Because my mom had a friend who like lived off of I think it's the Deschutes River. That's the river that flows by Roseburg, isn't it?
It the Umpqua. God,
Okay,
that
the Umpqua.
I just blanked. Yeah,
Okay, so the Umpqua River.
yeah,
There's like 5 million different rivers.
yeah, yeah.
Cut me some slack. I am
Uh,
from Yuma, where there's only one, and it's like a puddle.
yes.
So,
Thank the dam for that.
right, exactly. So,
Yeah.
but anyway, so I was there once, was visiting my mom's friend, and she had a house that was like off of the Umpqua River, and that was like my one time in Roseburg.
Okay.
And then I
Okay.
remember I've been to Bend,
Right.
like just on a family outing. But moving to Portland was sort of like happenstance. It just kind of like happened in a
Hmm.
weird way. Like honestly, like I didn't think I was gonna live in this city this long. I thought I was gonna be like in San Francisco or in LA, but
Right.
here we are.
Right.
I'm like
Yeah.
11 years later and I'm still here.
Yeah. I moved here 10 years ago. So yeah. So Carol also goes by the moniker Marla Darling as a performer and songwriter, I believe. Yes.
Yes. Yes and
And
no. Like I haven't I mean I've at the start of the pandemic, I wrote two songs because a friend of mine
Mhm.
gifted me one of those like cheap Casio keyboards.
Mhm. Those
And
are great.
so,
I love
yeah,
those things.
so,
Yeah.
I was able to like do some stuff, but I haven't like done anything like in a band setting since
Okay.
like 2014.
But you are a regular performer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I
Mhm.
mean, as regular as it can be in coronavirus times, you know.
Right, right.
Yeah.
But interesting enough, I did just finish a Tori Amos tribute show,
Yeah.
which had its debut last night, and so I was able to like, I had like a lot of like video editing. I've been learning video editing. It's not
Hmm.
my favorite, but I have been learning how to at least cut and splice and put together a show, so it looks good.
I think we're all learning video editing
Yes.
these days. Yeah.
But let's
So,
just say that Filmora is a little bit easier and a little bit more forgiving than like Windows Movie Maker.
oh yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, yeah. I use Vegas myself, and that's just because that's the one that came free with the Vio that I bought in 2007 or so. You
Yeah,
know, yeah. Um, but okay, so we are here to talk about the your upcoming production, which is Lost in a Place Called America,
yes.
which has recently been accepted into the 10 Tiny Talks Film Festival, and that will be happening September 18th and 19th. And so maybe we can go into detail about that, where it came from.
Sure.
Yeah.
So it's actually more of a fringe theater festival. It's not a film festival.
Mm. Did I
Um,
say film festival? I'm
you
sorry.
did,
Ah,
yeah. So it's
shows how my
more
brain works.
fringe theater in the sense that it's I think different artists like visual and also performance artists are coming together. It's a Black and Indigenous festival,
Okay.
and it's uh, let's see. So you have like dancers and artists, and then you also have one play, which is mine.
Okay.
And so Lost in a Place Called America, and I guess I'll just go into the
Hmm.
next, I'll just jump right in.
Sure.
So Lost in a Place Called America initially came from an idea that I had in 2018. Um, One of the shows that I produce is a drag open mic for new performers who are, um, just starting out. They're kind of like, 21, so they're like new to the bar scene. They haven't really quite hit their stride. Um, or they were doing all ages drag shows before they transitioned into like a 21 and over scene.
Okay.
And so Drag Danger Zone was like set up as like an open mic for new performers to do things to kind of like get warmed up to a stage and be in front of an audience. And then there was also established performers who maybe hadn't done anything in like 4 or 5 years and wanted to like reinvent themselves. And so that became a stage for them as well to like reinvent themselves and do new things that they probably wouldn't have done, say 5 or 6 years ago
Hmm.
when other venues were still open. So this was a venue that happened at Crush, and it was kind of set up as like an open mic. So we wanted to give new voices to people that hadn't really experienced the stage or just kind of wanted to work out things. It was like kind of, it was like more seen as like, like here's an opportunity to workshop something that you want to do before
Mm.
you take it to like say like a major show,
Right.
or um, you know you want to use this as like a launch pad for something else.
Hmm.
So one of the themes we always kind of, so me and my other producer Aurora, we do different themes every month, and one of the themes in this particular month was Broadway themed.
Nice.
And um, so I was like coming up with ideas for what I wanted to do, and one of the ideas was a West Side Story and the song America. And what if, like, everybody, I think everybody who's ever been a theater major always has that list of like the top 10 dream roles that we've always wanted to play but never have been able to.
Okay.
So I've always wanted to play the role of Anita in
Okay.
West Side Story, and I really wanted to talk about my story about, like, how I pretty much had done theater and had like kind of like set out this path of doing theater, but like I also found punk rock at the same time.
All right.
So um so I kind of like tell this story of, theater and punk rock and how that kind of like became this transformative moment in my life. And I was like thinking about all these different things. We were like, at the time, I think it was like Trump's second year in office, and things were like, you had like the kids in cages at the border, and you had like all the horror stories from the border happening. And then you had people that were attacked for being trans or queer. You had like, cops killing black people. I mean, like, there was like so many different things that were going on, and it was just kind of coming to a boil
Hmm.
almost.
Oh yeah.
And I had a couple friends who tragically took their own lives.
Mm.
And so that kind of like played a part in it. And so I was like, okay, well, I wrote out this thing, and I wrote this like kind of like spoken word sort of like monologue, and I included some drag elements into it. And then but then I held on to it because I was like, well, I kind of want to do it for Drag Danger Zone, but Drag Danger Zone is so light and it's like a cabaret show, and I don't know if I really want to do this like kind of weird piece in a bar. So another producer named Renee Musquez, who does Renee's Queer Cabaret, that was part of the Risk Reward Festival. They came up with this, the Renee's Queer Cabaret. And so I submitted Lost in a Place Called America to them. And I was like thinking, well, I want my story to be told, but I also want to have 11 other voices also be told too. I see it as a play. And kind of like how I had done, because I had directed Eric Bogosian's Sex, Drugs, and Rock and Roll, and this is kind of like kind of like the seed for it, where I had directed Eric Bogosian's Sex, Drugs, and Rock and Roll at AWC, and it was part of like their summer repertory theater,
Mm.
and I
Wait, pause for a second,
yes,
because AWC is Arizona Western College
yes,
in Yuma, Arizona,
yes,
where you and I are both from to some degree,
yes,
right? That's
yes,
where we know each other.
right.
Did you go to AWC? I went.
Right. Yes, I
Yeah.
did. I actually
Okay.
so I got in at like the last part of Jerry Giss's
Okay.
tenure.
Okay.
And the professor that came after Jerry was Chip Straley.
Okay.
And Chip Straley really kind of changed that whole theater department around. Like, if you remember Jerry's office and how it used to smell like smoke, it didn't smell like smoke anymore. I mean, it was still a disaster, but it didn't
Right.
smell like
Well,
cigarette smoke anymore.
that is the disaster is universal in college professors. So
Right. Oh
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. But anyway, it was so Chip really kind of expanded a lot of like, minds and what could be considered theater at
Hmm.
ADUB. And so you had so I directed Eric Bogosian's Sex, Drugs, and Rock and Roll, which is
Cool.
typically a one-person show, but I directed it as 12 different people.
Okay.
So because I used the whole cast of the repertory festival to be part of the show.
Nice. So it seems like this has been something that's been with you forever then. That like the seeds of this have been in your mind.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Because I've always kind of like, because I mean, I don't know if I really wanted to be a playwright, but I knew
Mm.
that I wanted to go back to direct again.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And while I'm not directing this show, because I had too much of a personal connection with it, and because I'm really good at the ideas, I'm not really good at execution. So that's why I
What?
asked somebody else who's really good at execution, kind of have that part in it.
Hmm.
But so this kind of like took shape about a few years ago, in which I was like envisioning, 12 different people. But I was also kind of inspired by Anna Devere Smith's Twilight 1992. And I was also inspired by a lot of these like oral history type plays that were happening. And I'd also directed Happy Birthday Wanda June, which is sort of similar.
Okay.
Um, and then there was also another play called Bob Rauschenberg America, which is basically different scenes that are based off of Bob Rauschenberg's artworks. And so that was sort of like a major influence on this show as well. So I was thinking, okay, well, if these types of plays exist, let's bring that in, show and bring that to a festival, or like, kind of like add to that genre, because I really like that kind of style of genre and that style of theater
Well, what
anyway.
would you call that style?
Um, I think I really like, I call it a freeform narrative.
Okay.
That's what that's what I wrote in the pitch when I did it. Was like, I called it a freeform narrative, and the two people who are curators of this festival said, well, if you're going to be an anarchist about it, lean into it. And I was like, works for me.
Sure.
I'm good with that.
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
so yeah, so I had so I've been asking, kind of like casting people, and people have been writing their own kind of scripts. And um, the tie-in is that they have to include America from West Side Story in some sort of fictionalized or semi-autobiographical way, kind of way.
Okay.
And then the other thing I should mention is that this play features someone on fire.
And the insurance company must love that.
So, well, yeah. So, like, one of the things that is, and how that kind of came to be was that I was really inspired by the "This Is Fine" meme.
Oh, right. 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 The dog.
like the
Yeah.
dog at the table with the coffee cup and like
Yep.
everything's on fire.
Yep.
So I was like, so there's this band called Badly Drawn Boy, and they have a song called What's Around the Block.
Hmm.
And it's like this very kind of happy, like kind of song, like everything's fine kind of thing. And I was like thinking about this kind of like singing in the rain musical theater moment, the Fred
Right.
Astaire moment where like, the
Right.
person's like walking with the umbrella and everything's going great even though it's raining.
Hmm.
Well, I wanted to have this moment where like this person believes that everything is fine, but they're on fire.
Right. Okay.
And so uh, um, and so like, I was like envisioning this 3-piece corporate America suit, with the blazer
Hmm.
and the tie and all that. And I actually met a fire artist who like did circus arts and stuff like that, and they're a fire performer. And I brought this idea, and I was like, so this is how my play closes, and this is how it ends. Is this something that you'd be interested in? And they were totally all about it. So I was like, awesome. I have a play now. I mean, that was
Wow.
kind of like the component that had to happen first was, I had to have somebody that was willing to work with fire.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there it was on my Facebook. I mean, I've met this person one other time at a show like a long time ago.
Wow.
And so just like this random happenstance of like, this is like back when I used to like, perform with the circus and like dark circus. And I was like, oh my God, you work with fire. Funny story. I'm looking for
Wow.
somebody who works with fire.
That's
So
amazing.
yeah, so like it was just like this weird synchronicity that just kind of came
Mhm.
together.
And
And so yeah.
yeah, it's so funny how stuff comes together in the creative process. It's like, I'm currently working on finishing up an album, and I've been farming out, singers, because most of the music is really geared towards the female voice, and I I've gone through so many singers, just to find
Mhm.
like the perfect one. And it's so interesting how you think, oh, this is a disaster, this is never going to work, and then like boom, you find the right person for the project, and and then things work out. And it almost would lead me to believe into some like kind of divine intervention, if I weren't
Right.
so skeptical, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I call it synchronicity. My husband calls it synchronicity.
Mm-hmm.
And for the longest time, I was just kind of like, no, 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 no,
Right.
no, 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 no. I mean, I'm very much like the Natasha Lyonne character in Russian Doll, which
Mm.
is kind of like, the universe is trying to fuck with me and I refuse to engage. That's me all the time.
Okay. All right. That can be a good attitude. I think there's some resilience that comes from that attitude.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right.
Well,
But it's also pleasant when things actually work out because
oh
then I'm
yeah.
like, oh, okay, well then I didn't have to try so hard,
Well, it makes it worth it.
and it makes it worth it.
Yeah. So one of the reasons that I wanted to do this like podcast was trying to find if there was continuity at all between people's creative processes, you know. And you're kind of an interesting case because we knew each other as kids, so we met in the community theater,
Mm-hmm.
and um, and that's interesting to me because, like, artistically, we didn't end up in similar places at all, right? Like a big focus of your life, artistic life, has been, like you said, like the drag shows and things like
Mm-hmm.
that.
Right.
Which, whereas I ended up being a church musician,
Mm-hmm.
right? So,
Right.
um, but at the same time, it's like our influences are so similar, right? Like you mentioned Tori Amos shows, and Tori
Mm-hmm.
Amos's music has been with me ever since I first heard Silent all these years. And
Right.
I've never stopped loving that.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you can speak to that a little bit. Like, is there a chain that took you from like the community theater, creatively, right, to where you are now?
Um. Well, I always knew that the kind of theater that spoke to me had an element of danger about it.
Okay.
Um, or it made perfect sense to me, but it didn't necessarily make sense to someone else. So I think when we did started doing white human community theater, I was sort of like getting really into like 1970s New York City.
Okay.
And then the flip side of that coin was the Rocky Horror Picture Show,
Yeah.
you
Right.
know. And then not only was it the movie of Rocky Horror Picture Show, but then it was also the midnight showings of
Hmm.
Rocky Horror Picture Show at like, the local theater.
Yep.
So, but interestingly enough, Yuma didn't have that.
Right.
Like at least not when I was there.
No, that.
It wasn't until like maybe when Chip Straley started coming in at AWC that the midnight showings of Rocky started to come back, because I know that was a thing for a while, like in the '80s, and it stopped.
Well, it was at every single one of our cast parties. I
Yes,
mean,
exactly,
right, for
exactly.
the
That I
community
remember.
theater. Yeah.
That I remember.
Yeah.
So, but to see a shadow cast and to see a midnight cast,
Hmm.
though, that didn't happen until like I think 2000, 2001.
Hmm.
And so I remember just kind of like seeing all of that and kind of like being a part of that. And then eventually I directed a midnight shadow casting for myself.
Nice.
Um, and then so did my husband a couple years later.
Mm.
And then um, I think one of the people that I met at my time at Arizona Western College, because I mean I was always like into like the weird avant-garde stuff. I mean, I like, because like I do like Tori,
Of
and
course.
but I also like Diamanda Galas and and Kate Bush, and so I was
Mhm.
like always kind of like on that fringe of weird anyway. Um and then like visually it was like Andy Warhol and like the stuff that was happening in New York City with the artists that were doing stuff in New York City. And so like one of the people that I was able to meet in like the early 2000s, around like 2004, 2005, was a person named Tyler Swain, who brought in the pitch for Bob Rosenberg America. And I was in that show,
Mm.
and I was like, this is so different from what I've done in the past. Because, in the past, when you've done theater, it's always been like this linear storytelling. And I mean, and linear storytelling is great. Everybody loves an arsenic and old lace. But what I love the most, though, is this kind of like theater in the round. You're kind of like having this intimate moment, and you're kind of like seeing things visually come to life that you maybe wouldn't have seen before. And I think that was always kind of like my favorite kind of theater, was this kind of punk rock edge
Mhm.
to it. That's like
Mhm.
really gritty underground, you know, kind of like dangerous theater.
Right.
That's what I love. And so I think just kind of like remembering that, and then also like doing a lot of like research too, like about like the different things that were happening in San Francisco
Mhm.
with like
Yeah.
the Dadaism movement, and then you also had the Coquettes from San Francisco, then you had like the drag from New York City, and all of this was just kind of like building and coming together, and that was kind of what was generating all of these different influences that I was envisioning. And then to kind of like top it off was the cabarets in the Weimar era in Germany
Well,
before World War II, where it was like this like kind of like dark cabaret. I mean, that's where the essentially the musical cabaret comes from.
of course. Yeah.
And so I mean, I was always, and cabaret honestly is like my favorite musical, my absolute favorite musical, and because it's like it's dark, it's gritty,
Mhm.
it's but it's like so fun, but at the same time it's
Yep.
like very like this kind of like gritty in your face kind of musical that's like not only about sexual identity and like capitalism and like this like awful Nazi takeover that happens. And, but then you also have that inner story too.
Hmm.
So I don't know. Personally,
Yeah.
I prefer the stage version of Cabaret
Oh
over the
yeah,
Liza
yeah.
Minnelli version of Cabaret,
You know,
clearly. But
well,
oh,
the movie, it's so easy to shit on the movie.
I know
It's
it is.
like but the movie had some redeeming qualities too. I just, my biggest gripe was they cut out like half the music at least,
Right, right,
which drove me
right.
nuts. Yeah. I don't know if you saw the documentary. It was about midnight movies, from the margins to the mainstream.
Hmm.
Um, but it was all about how like the experimental and the avant-garde, um, would start. People would kind of like push the envelope, and then the mainstream, like Hollywood, if we're talking about films,
Hmm.
Hollywood would kind of start to adapt elements of those things.
Right.
Um, and I wonder. I mean, is that something you agree with, and how do you feel about that?
Um, I mean, I see it. I mean, I know that Eric Bogosian kind of adapted his own stuff to have like this Hollywood element. I mean, I know talk radio was essentially like a one person show,
Sure.
and then he made it into a movie. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Oh, it could be. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Basically, I'm just curious on the thought droppings, I suppose.
Okay.
You know.
So there's that, but then there's also like John Leguizamo
No.
is another person that comes to mind too,
Sure.
because I feel like he was initially a stand-up comedian,
Mhm.
and I feel like oh gosh, what's the movie Freak that
Mm.
he does with Spike Lee? It's essentially a one-person show,
Mm.
and I feel like there's a lot of Hollywood elements in that too.
Interesting. Yeah. What was the movie that he did that he was in? Spike Lee did it. It was all about Summer Sam.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it seems like
Um,
those two work well together.
right.
Yeah.
I feel like they do, but I also feel like the main reason why they work so well together is because of the New York connection,
Sure.
the
Yeah.
Brooklyn connection. I
Yeah.
feel like the Brooklyn connection is kind of like the main reason why Spike Lee and Johnny Leguizamo get along so well.
Yeah.
They kind of
Oh,
come from that same area.
yeah. Man, this half hour went by too fast. Um I wonder if, for this show, for what you've created, and how you've collaborated, can you give us any kind of closing thoughts about like what did you learn from the process, and what do you think you'll take with you going forward?
It's really about uplifting other people's voices
Hmm.
that are so underrepresented and marginalized.
Okay.
And I think one of the reasons why I wanted these voices to come together in such a way is because I wanted to have this kind of like, I wanted people to be heard because I know how hard it is to fight to be heard. And so I think one of the things that I'm going to probably, I haven't necessarily started this process yet, so who
Mm.
knows, I might change my mind by the time September 20th comes
Right.
around. But I think one of the things I'm going to really take away from all of this is one, I can I can come up with an idea and stick with it.
Yeah, that's big. That's huge.
Because that's the Aries trait that I have that
Right.
is like the major flaw is that I'll come up with an idea and then I don't finish it and then
Sure.
it's bad for everyone. But I'm really good about a deadline though, so there's
Okay.
that. Um, so I think if I can take away one thing, it would be the fact that I was able to accomplish something when I spent a good 5 years of people telling me no.
Oh wow. That No, that is no small thing. That's
Yeah,
giant.
to
Yeah.
finally have this moment where I
Yeah.
finally have something to say after I think, after like just like a decade of people telling me no. Yeah,
Yeah.
this is a big thing for me.
Sure. It'd be a big thing for anyone. Wow. Well,
Yeah.
Carol Gates. I hope everybody gets to the September 18th and 19th 10 Tiny Talks. I think
Mhm.
just hearing about the project, it sounds exciting. So, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you for being
Oh,
here.
you're welcome.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Have
you're welcome.
have a beautiful day.
Have a good one.
Bye
Yeah,
bye.
you too. Bye.